just to introduce myself, I'm Helen Gibson. I'm Agencia's Managing Director and want to give a really warm welcome to everybody that's able to join us. Our first speaker, our headline speaker, we're absolutely privileged today to have joining us the wonderful businesswoman and campaigner, Gina Miller. So Gina, you're very welcome and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you for asking me. It's quite a few requests come in, but I always feel that it's important that to engage in ones where I think we're sort of not just like-minded, but really can engage in some really important conversations. So today, I wanted to talk to you about a little bit about my background, but more importantly, the shape of things to come and the opportunities and the threats that I can see, in my view, on the horizon from where we sit today, not least after some quite sobering figures from the Chancellor yesterday. I mean, from the perspective of my businesses, you may know me as a campaigner or, the court cases, but, I started my first business back in 1996. And ever since the first days, I've been called a misfit, a maverick, a millstone round some people's necks, be it sectors and campaigns that I felt very passionate about in terms of reform. But I've never really thought of myself as a campaigner. I do find that whole tag an odd one. I think my husband would probably say more a nosy Parker. Or my children say, somebody who can't stop worrying. So probably more a worrier than a warrior. And I don't necessarily wake up every day thinking, what cause can I fight today? It's more sort of as I walk through life and I come across things that sometimes metaphorically, but quite often physically give me a real ache in the pit of my stomach. I know I have to do something about it. And it's as simple as that feeling that when something makes you feel uncomfortable, I have the ability and should have the responsibility to stand up and say and do something about that. And I've learned over 30 years of being a campaigner that if you store up, if you turn away today, you tend to store up problems for tomorrow. So it's that old saying, isn't it? A stitch in time saves 9. I drive my kids crazy with my proverbs, and I'm storytelling and my tales of wise people and people to learn from. I don't think it's just a question of thinking that they're empty proverbs. I think many of the sayings of the old actually stand the test of time. And during my work as a peace ambassador for the Tutu Foundation, we've got Clive on the call today. There was an event at the Regent Park at the university, and I was chatting with one of the other speakers there from a West African culture, and she was telling me that in her culture they have this saying that proverbs are the daughters of daily experience. Mm-hmm. And I think that's such a powerful saying, and it really struck with me. One of my others is hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And I think that's really something I wanted to run through my talk with you today, because none of us have a crystal ball. But with experience, learning and listening, I do think when we acknowledge the rhythms of history, because we can learn from what has happened in the past, then if we have all of those tools in our toolbox, if you like, we can think about the future in a very different way and really be concerned about the shape of things to come. And COVID, as dark as it is, I think has shone a light actually on roofs that we did not fix when the sun was shining, on issues that we pushed to one side and thought that other people would solve. The novel COVID virus, as it's called, in my view, has thrown up some really novel issues for us to address as we go forwards. The decade after the global financial crisis, I remember so many wonderful words about things were going to be different, that we were going to learn lessons, that we realized that how other people lived their lives impacted on us and how we were going to live our lives. The truth is, I just don't think we did enough, be it in business or in society and in politics. I don't think we did enough in that decade after the global financial crisis. And after this crisis, we need to do better. It is that simple. To replace complacency with compassion, to think about delivering collaboration between communities, organizations, politicians, governments, so that we can serve as a catalyst for a more dynamic change than happened after the last financial crisis across all of society, across economics, education, healthcare systems, democracies, and the environment. But this is not a mere belief. I think now we are in much more of a desperate place. As like another proverb says, necessity is the mother of invention. And I think we are at the place now where we have to be very inventive. Because a lot of the issues facing us, we talk so much, we've heard so much talk in the last 3 or 4 years about borders. Actually, the big issues facing us are issues without borders. If you think about climate change, pandemics, not just human pandemics, but in terms of fauna and flora and animals and other pandemics that may come along, terrorism, social media, the impact of technology replacing workforces, aging populations, and the digital destabilizing of our democracies. These are issues without borders that we need to urgently address. I mean, I think that the challenges and the solutions that I hope will come out of where we are now will be in a similar realm of the Age of Enlightenment that dominated the world during the 17th and 18th centuries. One of my hopes is that the shape of things to come will embed across society, but very importantly, I wanted to touch on the idea of irresponsible capitalism. Because through COVID, we're seeing that a lot of us who had already started talking about social and responsible pathways, it's no longer just a nice to have. It is going to be an imperative as we come out of COVID. Personally, back when I started business in 1996, and I talked about responsible capitalism, many people considered it an oxymoron. How can you be responsible and also successful capitalist? Surely that's a contradiction. But I don't believe it is. However, I do think it's much more than some of the conversations centered around doing good and doing well. I think resilient, responsible capitalism requires fundamental integration of care and communities and how a business operates. Above all, it requires leaders to operate with a moral and ethical dimension in every way, every day. Back in the 90s, many people sniggered and said, a lot of these conversations were frivolous. And I was told, what you're talking about is a mama and papa type business. That, it wouldn't be, these sentiments were nice to have, but it was never going to be about successful business. Success was about being hard-nosed, about being sort of a macho culture. It was about professional, we had to be strong in every way. And, as far as I'm concerned, I don't believe that. I didn't then and I don't now. And what we did instead is we sort of tinkered around with sort of, what we thought a moral compass looked like in business. But I think actually now we just need a completely new compass as we go forwards. I mean, some people talk about it as conscious capitalism in terms of sort of socially responsible economics, that businesses should be conscious of operating ethically by serving the interests of all stakeholders, not just corporate management or shareholders. But whatever your language, be it conscious capitalism or responsible capitalism, the ethoses of both are very much the same. A sort of a human approach to capitalism, rather than that dominant paradigm of profit and an aggressive pursuit of profit. And people, some may say, oh, well, this is new thinking, progressive, disruptive. Actually, it's simply going back to the future, because the father of free market capitalism, Adam Smith, was not an economist. He was a moral philosopher. and who wrote in his book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776, he talked about the invisible hand actually being about the unintended social benefits of individuals pursuing self-interest through business. 10 years before that, he argued that humans had a natural inclination to care for and about each other, and that working together in a productive way would actually benefit all of society. So think back of that being the roots of where we are today when we think about business and capitalism. And I think COVID has allowed us, or is allowing us, the time and the space to contemplate our value in so many ways through different lenses, an opportunity to ask fundamental questions about our priorities, jobs, how we value people, work-life balance, what we can and cannot live without, and how we treat the most vulnerable. To reflect and rebalance and remind us that as businesses, we don't operate in isolation outside of society. We're actually an integral part of society, and that we do have power, social capital and power to address social inequalities and injustice and intolerance, and a really vital role in shaping the things to come. And I would urge that we take up that mantle and we carry it forwards for however long it takes to create real embedded change as we go forwards. Because whenever there are times of change, there are those who will exploit it. When there's a crisis, there may be those who think one way, but there are others who think another. There are those who would see a crisis as an opportunity to profiteer, to maybe, as Milton Friedman said, when there's a crisis, the ideas that are picked up are often the ones that are lying around. And if you look at the ones that were lying around over the last 4 or 5 years, especially politically, since the Conservative government, the new intake of 2015, which much more of a right-wing focus, movement in politics, those ideas were lying around. And so now we can see, I think, some of them not just lying around, but being taken seriously and being embedded in our politics and in our policy making. And I think we have to think carefully about that, because when I was sort of on the Brexit debate, back in, I started in October 2015, because I think they found it easy to find, tick boxing, a woman of color, a business person who could go up against particular in debates. But some of the things I was told I found extremely disturbing. And these are not my pontifications. These were real things that I was told. And think about it against the backdrop of where we are with COVID and how we come out post-COVID in our society and economy, is that we don't have to invest in social care. Because if you put women back where they belong, in the home, looking after children and families, we would solve so many problems. We wouldn't have low attainment at school. We wouldn't have such mental health issues. We wouldn't have the isolation of elderly people living in homes, because that's what women would do. And they would leave men to get on with the serious work. That we would actually, we don't have to worry too much about people being entrepreneurs or self-employed, because it's so much better if they work for big businesses, where big businesses can look after and drive the economy. We don't have to worry too much about the SMEs. Maybe that was a wrong decision to encourage entrepreneurship in our society. It's so much easier if it is run, as I said, by big business. And that, climate change, it's a cycle. It happens all the time. Throughout history, the planet has gone through cycles. So why are we so obsessed with it? Nature will automatically correct itself. These were real conversations, because I often go out of my way to speak with those who disagree with me, who have a different point of view. There is no point me talking into an echo chamber. I have never found that of value. I think it's much more important to understand that it is not incompetence, it just may be a different point of view, a different ideology, a different lens. And we must, I think, practice pragmatic, not just pragmatic thinking, but I think prismatic thinking, where what we do is we look at things from all its angles. Because again, another great man, John Keats, said, 4 seasons fill the measures of the year, and 4 seasons fill the mind of men. And we are not whole until we explore all of it. So we must think about prismatic thinking, about going that extra mile to understand where people may disagree with us, so that we can have a conversation that is one that is much more robust, but understanding. And I know some of this might sound utopian to you, but I'm sorry, I don't think we have a choice. Because what I think our direction of travel is one of a very dystopian future, where what we have is a closing down of debate, a closing down of a compassion for each other, of common sense, of reason, accountability, scrutiny, and I'm afraid the rule of law. So we have, I feel, no choice coming out of this crisis, but to step up and exercise whatever responsibility we have individually and collectively, because the world, the statistics, not just the perceptions, but the statistics are not looking good. In terms of mental health, it is something that this crisis, I think, has now highlighted. And what is extraordinary is not just the perception, but actually the statistics. As I said, WHO has said recently that 1 in 4 people in the world will be affected by mental or neurological disorders of some kind in the next few years. They have estimated around 450 million people suffering from this condition on the global stage. And we keep spending money, therapies, we're talking about it. We have done for some time now, but that dial is not moving enough either. We're not finding a place where people feel much more resilient in their emotional being. And depression is projected as being the leading cause of disease and a burden on nations by 2030. Think about that alongside the prediction that by that same year, 2030, for every 30 jobs we have at the moment, there'll be 1 because of technology. We have huge issues that we need to think about. 10 years is not long when it comes to really rethinking the future and the progress that we need to make for what I feel is a lax responsibility in thinking over the last couple of decades. And if we do not stand up and shape that future, then others will fill the void. And that is why I think it is so important for us to step up. But also, we have the responsibility for doing so, because there are so many freedoms and life that we've enjoyed that our children will not, and maybe children's children will not be able to enjoy. Yesterday's figures, as I said, were very sobering from the Chancellor. But, you know, when you think back that, you know, this is that OBS research and predictions was actually, when you read the report, wasn't on the worst case scenario. It wasn't anywhere near the worst case scenario. So an 11.3% decrease, the biggest since the Great Frost in 1709, is still not possibly what could be the worst outcome. So it could be decades, but we have to stand up and take responsibility and be creative and be innovative in our thinking, not just papering over. And that's what I think, again, we've done so often, is we've created, especially the politicians here, by the way, is that short-term thinking that has affected so much in society. I mean, we have a political cycle where it's not even 5 years, because 3 years into a government, they start thinking about electioneering and about a campaign to win the next one. So what we really have is policy making around a 3 to 5 year, if you're generous, cycle for issues that are going to last for generations. And that short-termism has got to be something else that we address. And we have to, I think about collaborative thinking in a way that brings together different ideologies, but also ring fences education, the NHS, how we deal with our elderly, how we deal with mental health. We cannot have short-term policy fixes for these deep-rooted social issues. And us as business people.
Gina, just to say a couple of minutes on timing.
I was just going to say, and I'm just coming to the end now to say that, I mean, we don't know in the uncertain world that we have what will happen, but I am determined, and I want to say to you all that we have to speak up, we have to stand up, and we have to be responsible. I intend on doing that today, tomorrow, and for the foreseeable future. And I really hope that collectively, that's what we all do, and that I see you along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. That's super, and really very thought-provoking, and a fantastic opening to our summit this evening. So thank you so much. Covered a huge amount of ground there. And I did say, hopefully not cut you off too soon, but I know that there are questions that a couple of people would like to ask. And whilst we won't get to all of them at all, it would be nice to be able to put perhaps just one or two of those questions to you now, if that's okay.
Of course.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm just going down to the chat where some people have posted some things. Yeah, okay. We've got some really good feedback and comments, Gina. And we've got one question here which I quite like. Somebody's saying, great analysis. What do we have to say? I guess as individuals, and you're encouraging all of us to speak up and do our bit individually and collectively. Somebody's asking, what should we be saying, or what do we have to say?
I think it's sometimes it's so daunting, but if you think about where your expertise lies and your experience and your passion, and something you feel really passionate about, it's a good place to start. And in your local community, it's a good place to start, or with young people around you. But I think if we speak from a voice of knowledge and authenticity, we really can engage with people. But I'd say I'm feeling so much disheartenment or almost a sense of loss from young people at the moment. I think it's really important that we start speaking to them about the future. But also, I think in business, it's so easy to be closed down. I mean, we're seeing some terrible statistics during the COVID crisis of people complaining or highlighting issues about anti-COVID, not enough health and safety, and they're being sacked or they're being closed down. So I think we have to promote the idea of more people being collectively responsible and being able to form little groups where you can highlight issues. Sometimes it's difficult to do it on your own, and it doesn't have to be a big group, but I think small groups together, you actually can come together and be a force for good. If that, it really is possible to do it.
Thanks, Gina. That's brilliant. I've got one other question for you. So there's all sorts of comments and questions coming through, but this is an interesting one, I think. Somebody's asking about your opinion on technology misinformation at the moment, particularly sort of now we know what we know about Cambridge Analytica's role and that sort of thing. So yeah, your opinion on that sort of
I really hope that someone would bring this up. I didn't cover it in my speech, but I'm prone, because this is one of the things I think we need to fix urgently, because the poisoning of conversations, of dialogue, the bullying, what's being allowed online is dominating our economy, our society. It's not a level playing field for small businesses. And so I'm personally, and I would encourage people to engage in this, in the UK, I'm calling for the online harms bill to come back next year, but for the white paper to be revisited to actually include fundraising platforms and also financial platforms, because the thing is, technology and social media companies are making billions with impunity. There are no rules and regulations, so it's so difficult for them when they do something wrong. Under what legislation are you holding them to account? So I believe there needs to be an online regulator in the UK. The US, I have to say that whatever you think about the Republicans and the divide between the Democrats and the Republicans, the one single issue they agree on is technology and the technology companies. Because in the US, the top 5 companies are technology companies in their stock exchange. And that's 20% of the US FTSE is dominated by 5 companies. And that is, it's just not something that they can allow to happen. And there will be a breaking of the monopolies in the US. there will be legislation being discussed, and we have to do this here in the UK. And I think it is absolutely vital that we think about a duty of care. There has to be regulations. There has to be accountability for users. Why should users have to be responsible and stay safe online? It's up to those who are actually making the money off online. So this is a massive area. But, you know, the poisoning of truth, the way fake news is going out there, we have got to start looking at bringing in rules and regulations for technology and social media companies. And it has got to be next year. And it is my campaign next year. And it's what I'm focused on, bringing together conversations in the EU, in the UK, in Europe, and in America, and all other countries.
Okay, thank you so much, Gina. That's brilliant. And again, I think we're about out of time, really, or we are out of time. Is there perhaps time for one more question, or shall we leave it there?
One more question's fine.
One more question, right? Okay, right. Last question, and this one again I think is interesting. Somebody asking, is there a need to educate the electorate as well as sort of other people like politicians and yeah.
I would definitely, one of the things I think I'd like to see in the citizenship classes that started in schools is actually for children or young people to be taught about our unwritten constitutions, how powers change. Because I mean, one of the fundamental flaw in our system at the moment is that Henry VIII powers, those old ancient powers, actually sit with the Prime Minister. There has to be legislation for this. They have to be codified, I believe. But I think it's understanding how our constitution works, how our election works, how local councils work. Because if people understand that, they'll be motivated, I hope, to become more involved. Because at the moment, there's this belief that politics belongs in a building in Westminster, in London. It's not actually something that affects our lives. But if you educate people with that connection that politics is policies, and policies is how you live your life, it's people, then that understanding will then create, I think, more interest in good people in becoming engaged in politics.
Thank you so much. And sorry that's been...
No, but thank you for asking, that's fine.
Really appreciate, the time and for trying to get to as many questions as we've been able to in the time slot that we've got. So thanks so much, and all the very best to you. And
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gina, and have a very good evening.
Thank you, and look out for the work next year on social media and technology companies.
Oh, we will, yes. I'm sure everybody will be. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you.
Thank you.
All the very best.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gina. Bye. Okay, so I hope everybody has enjoyed that, and sorry to those we've not been able to answer all the questions, of course, but yeah, thank you for everybody that sent comments and questions through, and we will of course pick those up after the event as well. Just to move us on now in terms of our next introduction, I'd like to introduce Pamela Salela. Pamela, I can't actually see you, but I'm hoping you just popped up with your screen. That's wonderful. So to everybody, just to introduce Pamela, again, really privileged, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and for sharing your time and your expertise. Pamela is the country head, the UK country head for Brand South Africa. I've actually got a slide which I haven't put up yet, but I'll just get that up so that everybody can see. Can people see that? Sorry.
That's up on screen.
Good. Okay, that's excellent. So Pamela, and you've very kindly agreed to be our host for this afternoon. So you will be taking over now in terms of introducing yourself and our next speaker. So thank you very much, Pamela.
Thank you very much, Helen, and thank you very much to Gina Miller for that inspiring talk on Towards a Decade of Less Talk and More Action, where she actually is giving a clarion call to all of us to collaborate in terms of our thinking, and for all of us as individuals and as a collective to come together and be the change that we want to see post the pandemic, post this crisis that we are facing. I just want to start by thanking Agentia and Helen Gibson for this opportunity for us to gather here today under the topic, Time for Something Better Beyond COVID, a new approach to some of the most complex issues of our time. Thank you to Agentia, which is at the forefront of transforming justice, of transforming policing, and of transforming security. Mine is to make sure that we go through a conversation with all the speakers that are scheduled today. But more than anything, what we aim to do today is to educate you, is to inspire you, and to help you by highlighting solutions which are relevant to this topic that we are looking at, and really to come together as a think tank to say, what is it that can be done beyond COVID, and what have we seen to have worked amongst these various organizations in this time of crisis? Without further ado, because time is always, a factor, and it's a limited resource and a limited commodity, let us go to Graham Dixon. Graham Dixon, we are going to be talking about addressing the opioid crisis and coming up with practical solutions and learning for switching off painkiller addiction. So let us start with you, Graham, and have a conversation around the work that you are doing.
Thank you. Hi, Pamela, and hi, everybody.
Thank you, Graham. Firstly, can you introduce yourself and your organization?
Okay, I'm Graham Dixon. I'm the Director of Innovation and Service Delivery for Agentia. And in that role, I delivered the Rewire service and developed it to specifically tackle people who have an issue with addiction to prescribed and over-the-counter medications, and again, particularly around the opioid crisis.
What would you say is the scale of this opioid crisis?
Well, it's scary. In the US, which of course everybody's heard of, the opioid crisis alone is responsible for reducing the average lifespan of the American population. And I saw a recent report saying up to over 200 people per day are dying as a result of the opioid crisis. In this country, opioid pain medications are prescribed to 5.6 million people. That's 13% of the adult population. And it's a higher rate for women and older people. So it is a very, very high scale problem, and people are taking these painkillers for longer.
So I've just had a comment, someone saying that my microphone is not clear. I've tried to sort that out. Is it fine now? John, is my microphone fine now? Okay, we'll hear a nod from you. Thank you. That is shocking. It's shocking to learn that there's a reduction in the lifespan of the population, Graham. So what would you say then is the impact of the crisis on this, given that there already was a problem with the opioid addiction?
Okay, one of the things that we're seeing across most forms of addiction is the crisis is increasing the level of consumption. And among prescribed medication, opioids tend to be highest in the most deprived areas. What we're seeing in the crisis is that people who from white-collar jobs are actually starting to take more prescribed medications, suffering more of depression and anxiety. And of course, they're not seeing the doctors, so all the repeat prescriptions, everything being online, growing iceberg, this growing issue of people who are simply increasing their consumption of opioids.
And so what has been then the impact of the pandemic on the opioid crisis itself?
Well, we don't know yet. It's very anecdotal, the evidence, but it appears to be, if you look at the increase in consumption of alcohol and other addictive substances, it's definitely it seems likely to be on the increase.
Graham, what would you say is different about your approach?
Well, I think we're the first people who've actually looked at the data in medical practices and used modern technology to allow us to have an intelligence-driven service. So we've looked at people's prescribing practices, those patterns that put the most at risk, i.e. long terms on prescription, increasing prescribing, asking for their prescriptions more often, seeking out different doctors, etc., all those sort of behaviours, which is information that's available within general practice, and then use that to target our outreach specifically to those patients and invite them in for a chat. And the important thing is it is a chat. We've made time to actually see the patients, sometimes with a doctor, but more often with a psychosocial worker. And instead of giving them 10 minutes maximum, we can give them 20 or 30 minutes in a session and talk about the issues. So it's very different, and it goes from big data through a conversation. And we've also, since the crisis started to add on online functionality all the way up to appointments with consultant psychiatrist. So it's a treatment journey for the whole population rather than a simple, I've done a quick audit of your painkillers, please stop taking as many.
Would you then say that that is what works in the addressing of the opioid crisis? And is there anything else in your observation that you have seen to work in this regard?
Well, what we can't do is bring these patients into normal drug treatment clinics. They won't engage. So treating them where they are, be that in their GPs or online, is the key issue. Making it an easy conversation to have, educating people. People genuinely don't know what the long-term impacts of opioids are, and they don't realise that actually, if you're treating them for pain and it isn't getting better with opioids, increasing the dose is very unlikely to help.
So what needs to change?
We need very much to look at this as being a whole person and whole community issue. We've got for the first time, both nationally and internationally, these fantastic data sets. My background at NATO was IT, and I saw the early days of what big data could do. We can now apply that at local levels, at general practices, and actually analyse that information and use it to be intelligent in how we talk to populations. So rather than having to spend a letter out to everybody, you send it out to the 200 most at risk.
And what can those commissioning services do to help?
Look at the whole pan. I've worked a lot in the community, particularly with general practice. I work a lot with our primary care direct team who support primary care networks. So nationally, it is about bringing people to where they need to be and not seeing this as being an addiction problem, but being as a problem of education, involvement, and putting the right amount of time into a service at the time the patient needs it, rather than waiting till they have a massive problem and require addiction treatment and the complexity, which we can handle. Most of our patients, most of the people we identified actually changed their behaviors on the back of a telephone call and a quick chat. So you can get a huge bang for buck very early and also stop this dreadful progress towards addiction, which people who don't have the opportunity to have those conversations are likely to take.
Wow, thank you very much. I think you are the first organization that also plays on the thread of what Gina Miller was talking about, which was about education, which was about community involvement in solving this crisis. And you are also then adding the issue of bringing in services that are targeted at assisting the individuals at community level. Thank you very much. Any other thought or closing remark from your end?
Just one very quick one. It was relating to what Gina said. Yes. People do come together. We've now had people from IT companies, from psychiatrists and consultants, all coming to us because we are pretty much the only people who have been persistently tackling and raising this issue outside the sort of health service for many years. So we've become a hub, exactly what Gina suggested. It's like-minded people getting together to make a difference.
Wow, wonderful. That's a great closing note, like-minded people getting together. And I'm sure that as we are here in this conversation, in this webinar, that we are like-minded people. We want solutions. We are solutions-driven. And I can see from the comments that are coming through that there is a keen interest in making sure that beyond COVID, we are able to really have this new approach to some of these more complex issues that we are facing in our time. Thank you very much, Graham, for your contribution. We will now move on to Tim Holt.
Hello, Pamela. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
I'd just like to encourage those who are giving us questions that we will deal with them at the end. So please do keep them coming as we now go to Tim. Tim, I know you're the specialist, you're the guru in terms of organized crime, and we're looking forward to hearing your insights and how we can collaborate, to tackle this throughout the disease and beyond COVID. So let's start by asking you to introduce yourself and tell us the work that you are also doing with Agentia.
Okay, so hello everybody. My name's Tim. I'm a career law enforcement officer. Well, most of my career prior to now, long time in the police force, and then several other law enforcement agencies such as the National Crime Agency, Serious Organised Crime Agency. Work in the Serious Crime Directorate, Director of the Serious Crime Directorate for Agentia, where our specialism is assisting clients, organisations, jurisdictions to deal with rule of law matters, but in more specialist arenas. So things like corruption, anti-corruption. We've got the capability of turning to most types of crime and offering solutions in dealing with what those individual issues are.
And what is the scale and nature of serious and organized crime?
Okay, well, unfortunately, throughout the COVID pandemic, crime hasn't stopped, as we're probably all very aware. We've still got international problems such as drug trafficking, and people trafficking is always in the news. And of course, the volume crime is all around us. I'll come back to that in just a second. But of course, the thing that really has seemed to have increased is that of fraud and cybercrime in particular, which is related to fraud. It's a question that volume crime itself within the UK seems
Tim,
to have got.
just to say, Tim, sorry, you've got a very squeaky chair. Can you sit still?
I've just seen that comment. My apologies.
Squeaking.
My apologies to everybody. Well, you've got to introduce a little bit of humour to these things, haven't you? Especially when we're talking about crime. Yeah, my apologies for that. Volume crime itself in the UK is actually down by around about 20% since the start of the pandemic. And those are figures from the Office of National Statistics. And I don't want to put loads of figures in the presentation, but it does show, it reflects what's happened effectively in that obviously more people are working from home and at home for longer periods of time. Therefore, those types of personal crime or that we're used to have actually slowed down. However, fraud during that same time has increased by up to 30%. And that's where people might most come across crime in the current environment.
Should we be worried then?
I don't think worried is something that we should be. I think we should be cautious, and I don't think it's we need to be worried. If I take the UK as a whole, from the National Crime Agency have identified something like 4,500 serious organised crime groups across the country. It sounds a lot, but actually criminals involved in this type of crime is 350,000, which is less than 0.5% of the whole country. So it's the chances of serious organised crime directly affecting us are not massive. However, we are likely to be touched by the fraud, the increase in fraud, and most of us will be used to getting telephone calls, to be getting fake text messages and emails, which have increased exponentially since the start of the crisis. So there are a number of things that we can do. Again, as I say, I don't think it's a case of being worried. I think it's a case of just being vigilant and cautious. And one of the things that Gina touched on was the digital nature of technology and how it crosses and transcends borders. And certainly that's reflected in crime and what is happening in the increase in fraud.
Just to encourage our audience, Tim talked about the rule of law, and the work that Agentia does in that area involves justice reform, police reform, prison reform, financial investigations, and integrated border management. And Tim has just alluded to the technology across borders as part of what is being looked at when we're looking at the issue of organized crime across the world. So we would encourage questions in that regard as well. They can be tackled by our esteemed set of panelists today. So what is different then, Tim, in your approach?
If we're looking at Genesis approach, we work with a wide variety of I'll call them clients for want of a better phrase, but that they consist of organisations, they consist of governments, they consist sometimes of individual police forces, whatever the organisation may be. And we try to take a bespoke view to each one, and communication is the key. You find out exactly what the specific issues are, and then we devise a specific solution for those individual issues. For example, we're working in a project in Bosnia at the moment, which is around anti-corruption, and we've designed specific bespoke solutions which address the issues within that particular environment that they're working in, which is individual to anywhere else in the world. And we have lots of different expertise across our team, which deal with a wide variety of criminal activities, such as terrorism, such as child exploitation, and of course anti-corruption is one of the major ones at the moment, and of course fraud and cybercrime. And we have the capability to be able to deal directly and in a bespoke fashion for any of those particular issues.
Guys, just to say we're a bit over time, so
Okay, should we move on to the next person?
I think we're okay, but we should wrap it up in a minute or so, just to give you a nod.
Okay, Tim, let's have your closing remarks and maybe what you can say to those who are commissioning services.
Okay, well, with regard to commissioning services, very quickly, and as Helen said, I'm very conscious of time, but be transparent. The commission services, Gina mentioned about social media needing a regulator. I totally agree with that. A lot of the frauds, a lot of the ways that people are getting into trouble and coming across fraud is through fake websites, is through fake postings that are on things like Facebook and other social media. People have to be wary for that. And if I'm going to close, I would say for everybody, be vigilant. Stop, take a minute to think carefully before giving out any of your money or information about you. Challenge people. If somebody calls you or knocks at the door, challenge them, especially if you are not clear on who they are or it's unexpected. If it's anybody that's genuine, they won't mind that. Protect. If concerned that you've been the victim of a fraud, contact your bank or contact Action Fraud or the police. Take action straight away and don't be afraid to do so. Above all, look out for each other, especially as we come out of COVID, because criminals won't stop. They will still be looking for the opportunity, and we can all help each other, both individually and business-wise.
Thank you, Tim, for calling us to be vigilant. Let us now move on to Robin Lockhart, who really is a catalyst in communities, and he deals with youth crime, violence, gangs, drugs, and mental health issues. Robin,
hi
welcome.
there.
Welcome.
Hi,
okay,
Thank
please
you.
introduce yourself and tell us about your organization.
So I am the director and one of the founders of Catalyst in Communities. We're a social enterprise based in London, but now working wherever we can, all over the world, whenever we get a chance to. I'm one of the Commonwealth's global ambassadors for youth work. And we also run a charity called Through Unity that we didn't start, but Through Unity was started many years ago by Damilola Taylor's father to provide support for families bereaved through homicide.
Gina Miller, called us to have a conversation with young people. Can you tell us, since you work with young people, what is the scale and the nature of the issues that are facing today's youth? What are young people going through?
Yeah, I get asked this question quite often, as you could imagine. If we look at the media, if we listen to the news, read the newspapers, it feels like there is a an onslaught daily of statistics about how terrible young people are. And I ask us to consider how we would feel if there was an onslaught about adults. The reality is most young people are fantastic, even the ones who have been through some horrific, painful experiences and maybe displaying some, terrible behavior. I have to view them as the solution. So the nature is that they are facing judgment under all these different categories, whether we're talking about violence or drugs or addiction or unemployment or all of those things, mental health, violence to self, violence to others. Young people seem to be, they're cutting across all of those themes. And they quite often are held up to be the problem.
And what has been the impact of the pandemic on young people? And before you say that, please can you name your charity again? Because there's someone who's interested in finding out the name of your organization.
So the organization is called Catalyst in Communities. And we also run a charity called Through Unity.
Fantastic. Thanks. So please tell us about the impact of the pandemic on the youth.
It's been tough. I mean, we've got several projects running where we were meant to be on the ground working with young people face to face, just as lockdown 1 commenced. Often the young people that we're tasked with working with already are facing some challenges. They have difficult situations in their lives and they need support. And being locked in the houses where quite often some of these challenges and problems occur, where the problem emanates, has presented a unique set of problems for us. We've got some young people that are on our books that we're working with who we know that it's an abusive household. There's violence in the house, there's drugs and alcohol being abused in the house. And we now know that they're stuck there, or they were during lockdown 1. So it's compounded things. There's also been a very a degree of loss of service. Some of the social service visits, the support visits that used to happen when people used to come to their house, or some of the support they were able to access after school just simply hasn't been there. So there's a big wave, I think, of work needed post-COVID, where we're going to have to really, really, really provide what's needed. The young people don't stay young. That's the one thing we can guarantee about them. If we don't work with them now, further upstream, they'll carry those problems throughout their lives, and we'll be picking it up through some of the other work that Agencia and some of the other speakers also end up doing. And I want to intervene as soon as possible and save it. If we can save money by preventing problems further down the line for people, I think we ought to.
What's different about your approach, Robin?
I think we adopt an approach that we call the art of perception. We encourage people to see themselves through a different lens, and we, wherever we can, try to view the young people through a different lens. I never see a young person as being the problem. They're facing the problem. They're under the problem, but they're the only solution, really, the only permanent solution. So I think what we do differently is that we engage young people in a real process of asking for their help, which throws them at first. We put them in a room. Let's say it's a project where we've got 10 gang members or ex-gang members or victims of gangs or something in a room. They're not used to being asked for help. So we sit them down and say, look, we need your help. We've been tasked by the Home Office or the government or the lottery to do this work with you around this challenge. I'm not an expert on that. I've never been in a gang. Could you help us with this project? Those people out there, the teachers, the people in the pupil referral unit, quite often have very low expectations of you. I think they're wrong. We try to show them that they can shift their way that they see themselves and their place in the world.
Interesting concept there about the art of perception. So then what can we do?
I think that recognizing that somebody can face multiple challenges. They could be violent to themselves and to others. They could be addicted. They could be homeless. They can appear that they're a problem to society. But recognizing that they need to be the solution. We need to engage them in a process. If people feel valued and valuable and start to feel secure in themselves and who they are, they don't tend to go for those crutches like alcohol and drugs. They don't tend to become as frustrated and angry so they commit an act of violence. When we support somebody to see that any anger and violence is an expression of pain and hurt, we get into the conversation about that. And then if you can help them to dilute and dissolve the pain and the hurt that they went through, the end violence no longer makes any sense. So the behavior changes, it disappears. So supporting that kind of approach, I think engaging people in the true source of their problem. Like quite often we see like the drug use, let's say, as the problem. It's normally, it's a symptom of something deeper. So if we only tackle the outcome, if we only tackle the symptoms, something else will pop up later in their life. You know, across the board, whether we're talking about violence or addiction or mental health, it comes down to those well-being conversations. So we engage people in powerful, meaningful, often transformational conversations where they go, what? Like the face that people make when they see an optical illusion for the first time. That's what we're looking for. When somebody goes, what? I remember telling a young man just before lockdown, we were in a room and he was talking about all the violence that he'd done and the stuff that he's going to have to do now because he's caught up in a situation. And he was discussing his thoughts. And I just made a comment. I said, you do realize that none of us are obliged to believe or act on our thoughts. And it hit him like he was just like, what? Wow. Wow. So he then has other options.
I see. I suspect, Robin, that after this webinar, there will be a number of people who are coming to you, offering assistance, just looking at the comments and the interest in the work that you are doing. And so what would those who are funding, what would you say to those who are funding services?
I think commissioners...
As a departing thought.
Yeah, commissioners, funders, supporters, sponsors, all of us, we all have a duty, I think, to remember that the way that we came together globally because of COVID, you know, if we can collaborate on that level and create such a significant positive impact around a disease, we can do that around violence, we can do that around addiction, we can do that around well-being issues. You know, the speech, the words that we heard at the beginning from Gina and the follow-up conversations that we've heard, you know, there's a tsunami coming of depression, there's a tsunami of unemployment, there's a tsunami. All of these problems are not going to go away without us helping the world to shift how we perceive them. And I think that if we can recognize the value of mistakes, and we can encourage also funders and commissioners to recognize, as a charity, as a social enterprise seeking funding, it's quite difficult to approach your funder and go, we got it wrong. Like we've made some mistakes. We try to cover it up with lovely reports and stuff sometimes, the whole sector. Whereas we know we can learn from mistakes. Yeah. But we don't make mistakes. Our mistakes make us. And if we can improve on that, if we can help, if commissioners can enable a process whereby we're able to prove and sort of show the impact of what we've prevented. You know, the work that we do and thousands of other organizations like us do has huge cost saving implications. And yet we scrabble around seeking, you know, sometimes we have conversations with funders about, you know, well, you chose to buy stamps instead of envelopes with that money, but you didn't seek our approval first. I'm being a little bit cynical there. But you know, the work that we do is hugely valuable across the sector. And I think that we need to recognize that there's cost savings. If we invest in it now with young people, the cost savings when they're adults are immense, absolutely immense.
Thank you very much, Robin. And I suspect that you're also a philosopher, but we can have that conversation.
I look forward to it, Pumela. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to call upon the Tutu Foundation in the UK, represented by its chairman, Clive Conway, and also Maria Scallion. This is an organization whose mission is really to prevent and solve conflict and to help and build peaceful communities by providing facilitation and mediation services across the UK and elsewhere. And what I like is that they have this principle of Ubuntu, which is I am because we are. Clive, Maria, introduce yourself, please, and what your organization does.
Hi, well, my name is Maria. I am the project leader for the Ubuntu Roundtables project, which is a joint venture between the Tutu Foundation and Youth Futures. And as you mentioned there, we very much work with the principles of Ubuntu. And we have a project where we bring young people into conversation with police, and we very much use the values of the Tutu Foundation to ensure that, as Gina mentioned, we're replacing complacency with compassion. and we're speaking to the young people about the issues of today, and not only about the present, because as Robin says, young people actually do have a lot of solutions. So Clive, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Clive de Conway, the chair of the Tutor Foundation. I've been there for a few years now, and our main project is the roundtables, but we also have held quite a few summits to do with certain aspects of really mediation and, for instance, hate, its consequences and its cures. And we've had some wonderful speakers. We even had F.W. de Klerk. We certainly had Gina. And the way forward is to really concentrate on these roundtables.
You issued a statement during the death of George Floyd, where you said that as a society, we need to channel the outrage into positive change, and that we need to restore faith in humanity. What can we learn from Black Lives Matter?
Well, the Black Lives Matter is about oppression of minorities, and it's about institutional racism. And actually, most of the speakers today have already touched on things like this. The issues that the young people that we work with in particular face are issues of race and discrimination by police in particular. But those same young people are quite often excluded from schools, or maybe involved with drugs issues, and they're affected by multiple issues across society and are very much our victims. But what our project has done is to change that perspective from young people seeing themselves as victims to giving them, or rather allowing them to take the initiative themselves to find their own solutions, to develop their strengths, and to go into conversation with the police officers who are in their own streets. The project started with young people who were involved in a stop and search, which was less than ideal. They, instead of getting angry about it, they went and had a word with their youth worker, and they initiated a conversation in their local police station with local police officers. So we have an example there of what Robin was talking about young people having strengths and solutions, and those same young people now work with us on that project, driving it forward.
Very good. I think, if I may add, value should be given to police officers who reach out and engage with communities. So important. Rather than hitting targets, this should be encouraged by those at senior levels, such as politicians.
I completely agree. We've talked right through this about the ability to engage with the individual, to speak to that one person and see what will make a difference in your life, not in society's life, but in your life, because we aren't a society, we're a group of individuals who make up a society. And if we can speak as an individual to one other individual, we have a personal connection, and that's how people thrive and survive. We need personal connections, we need to feel understood, and that's quite often where young people do fall into the trap of, I need to have a certain sense of identity, therefore I will join this gang, this will keep me safe, that I need to have this tough appearance because otherwise I'll be vulnerable. Well, we're actually, whenever we can be vulnerable with each other, such as the opportunities that we provide through the Roundtable project for young people and police to show that vulnerable side together. And we deliberately make it an equitable situation rather than talking about equality. We realize that the police are walking into a situation where they're usually seen in uniform and they have a power given to them by the state. So we equalize that power by ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to speak and everyone's valued equally. That's not an opportunity that young people get very often. We ensure that, for example, the police officers come in ordinary clothes because the uniform of the police officer is associated with power. And it literally does involve breaking things down into those minutiae so that we can generate the connections where someone can look into someone else's eye and have a genuine conversation. I'll be honest with you, most of the work done in a round table is not during the facilitated conversations, but it's in the pizza afterwards. Whenever they've realized that, okay, the ice is broken and we're now sharing food together, we can have a conversation and we can share. And that's where the humanity, that's where the Ubuntu really shines through.
So Maria, the pandemic happened, and what has been the impact then on the Black Lives Matter? And I think coupled with that, you can share with us, what are you doing differently right now? And what needs to change?
Well, I think the one thing about this particular crisis is that the COVID crisis was very large and very sudden and a very global issue. There are many, many other issues out there that are the same size or bigger. And I think what we need to point out is the fact that whenever it came to it and COVID needed an immediate response, actually the resources were provided. And that there are equivalent issues of equivalent scale out there, like for example, the opioid crisis, like for example, violent crime, that the resources must be out there somewhere, but are they being targeted correctly? And in our own personal response to Black Lives Matter, and in context of COVID, we've had to do an awful lot of things online. The issues that we've faced have been, as Robin also indicated, have been quite challenging in dealing with young people. But we've had to just adapt and innovate and speak to the conversations, contribute to the conversations that we're involved in, and just, well, Clive, do you want to take over from there?
No, I think
thank you for that. I see Clive. Clive, would you like to add on to that? And perhaps even sharing what's different about your approach as even as a Tutu Foundation in tackling these issues?
Yes, well, what's different is that, well, we base it on Ubuntu. The Tutu Foundation is based on Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is a philosophy and a tool. It says that we are all interdependent. It was used by Mandela and Desmond Tutu a lot. And, but it is an African philosophy and tool. And Ubuntu basically says, I am because you are. And if there's quite a lot of pieces by Desmond about Ubuntu on YouTube, and also his granddaughter, who's my daughter-in-law, wrote a book, very successful book called Everyday Ubuntu, and it's in the shops. But also she does a weekly iPod called #Everyday Ubuntu, when she interviews amazing people, including Gina Miller.
That's wonderful. And so what can those who are commissioning funding or services do to help you as a concluding statement?
Well, earlier I mentioned the fact that the minutiae of the issues are what we need to talk about. The fact that the tiny little interactions that a community police officer might have in a neighborhood, getting to know individuals, being personable with the individuals, getting to know the children in a school, and then being recognizable to them walking down the street as they go home after school. Those interactions with police officers don't really happen anymore. And an awful lot of police officers are moved 6 months again, 6 months somewhere else, and they don't have the opportunity to sustain relationships in communities. And I think that is sadly missing, and I think that's something that could be changed. I also think that long-term planning is necessary, because short-term interventions quite often have quite short-term outcomes. So we need to be able to have the same individuals following up on something that happened this year and next year and next year, and build that community spirit, keep those interactions going between people, and keep the humanity going, and make sure that people realize that the police officers who walk in their streets are human beings as well. They're not just a robot that's been put there in a uniform. they're human beings, they have personalities, they have families, and they can get along together.
Yes.
Given the opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much to the Tutu Foundation for creating spaces for people to speak to each other, to listen to each other, and to hear from each other. Thank you very much for what you are doing. Helen, you'll be pleased that we've managed to catch up with time. So we are on track
You're doing great, Pamela.
to the next speaker at the scheduled time. So Marcus Ismail Eagle, we are going to be talking about the creative solutions to the challenge of employability in a COVID economic climate.
Hi, Pamela. Hi, everyone. Hope you're all well.
Thank you so much. Lovely to have you. You know, without further ado, let's just dive into it. What is the scale of the employability challenge?
So, my background, I currently work in the South Yorkshire area in Doncaster. I head up the Youth Crime Prevention Service. But this afternoon, I'm talking to you as a senior partner in a social enterprise that works across North Lincolnshire, Red Everywhere. And our task has been working with the Black and Asian minority community in North Lincolnshire. So the problem is significant. In terms of young people, and particularly in terms of Black and Asian people, COVID has had a significant impact. It's affected different generations, different groups in different ways, but those vulnerable young people have been really impacted significantly in terms of employment, in terms of careers that are sustainable into the future. So, you know, we've had a number of sort of data sets released this week ahead of the budget statement. And one of the figures that was really significant was that youth unemployment is set to again rise more than it was in the 1980s under Margaret Thatcher's leadership. So it's a significant problem for all young people, but particularly the group that I work with, the BAM community. It's a real serious concern.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you think can be done in this regard?
So I think there's conversations to be had. There's a range of approaches, and it really embeds in a simple concept about collective impact. And I think a number of the speakers have mentioned this already. Gina, in her opening remarks, was about people stepping up. So the approach that we want to see is better services, better targeted policies, but also collective impact, collective approaches. And that means that, you know, we all work together to find these solutions. The impact, you know, of Black and Asian young people not working is significant for a number of different factors. Tim was talking about organised crime groups, and it's not just synonymous with Black and Asian communities, but there is a group of organised crime agencies that target vulnerable young people. And I don't live in the big metropolis of Birmingham, Manchester, or London, but the problems are here in North Lincolnshire and in South Yorkshire as well. So it's about collective impact, and we need to do that now before we sort of, you know, sleepwalk into a real serious problem into the future.
Mm-hmm. That's very profound when you talk about the need for a collective impact. And what would you say works from your experience? What would you say works, and what would need to change now given the pandemic that we have gone through?
So we've recognized that during the work that we've done, there are particular elements that will support young people onto that positive pathway. One of the key ones, and I think Robin touched on this, is about relationship, about that person, that individual, that mentor, that coach. Absolutely critical. So, you know, in our BAM 100 program, we're actually sort of developing mentors and coaches from the BAM community to support those BAM young people. And those coaches and mentors have got a level of success, have actually shared a similar lived experience in terms of discrimination challenges. So they're able to offer that career guidance and that support. And it's about stepping up, that collective impact that is really sort of essential. Then from there, it's about sampling the world of work. The world of work in the next 10, 15 years is going to be different. So exposing young people to those future roles and opportunities, whether it's in artificial intelligence, whether it's, you know, about how they can transfer their gaming expertise into problem solving around digital technology. There's a real sort of, you know, importance to actually being future ready as well. So we look at the real world of work now and into the future.
Wow, that's encouraging, as it talks to real practical interventions in terms of your approach. Now, what can those who are commissioning funding or services do to help you?
I've been sat on the other side of sort of commissioning services, and the question that I always get, why don't you make the commissioning process simple? Why do you have to make it competitive? So I would say, you know, first and foremost, it's about collective impact, about working together around social responsibility, and actually identifying companies with a real solid corporate social responsibility to be partners. The approach is about sort of keeping it simple. You know, if we don't have to sort of be competitive, don't put that into the equation. You know, look at sort of, you know, support to those grassroots organizations. You know, those community connectors are really important. So work with them as well, because we're talking about an approach that actually supports that community's needs. So that conversation that many speakers have mentioned is really vital to actually really moving us forward into a better, brighter future.
Mm-hmm. I would presume that in your position, you have looked at the interventions that have been made for employability, and you've identified the gaps, and you've been able to see what is it that really works and what doesn't work. You've shared with us what works in your regard. What would you say then doesn't work? And if you had to advise those who are interested in this employability, what would you say doesn't work from what has been done by society to date?
I think there's always a toolkit that's pulled out in terms of employability programs, CV building. You know, there's a lot of that. I think we're in a different place. I think one of the things that really does sort of irk me is seeing the same old tools being brought out in a different age and a different time. We're much more connected digitally as well. We need to look at the emerging roles of the future and plan and have a career strategy around now, and actually start doing that work earlier with young people in school, whether it's at year 6 and year 7 upwards as well. And people say, well, young people at year 6 at the top end of primary school, you know, might not know what career aspiration they have, but some, you know, recognize the things that they'd like to do and some of those skills that they're interested in that you can nurture and develop. So it's earlier intervention and conversations about the world of work and the world of work in the future that will allow young people to start build up where they would like to spend the next 20, 30 years. But an important thing is the world of work is not just the only option that's available. Young people are very entrepreneurial. So developing enterprise and that entrepreneur ability within organizations and outside of organizations is vital as well. So there's a lot we can do, and my call to action is support organizations that are working with the next generation, that are looking at collective impact. Share your expertise. If you have the time, volunteer, support, mentor, coach the next young person into that next role that they're sort of got their ambitions sighted on.
Thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, my role ends at this point. The brief from Helen was that we should keep it simple and it should be solutions focused. And I hope that in the time that we have engaged, we have managed to do that for you. What we would like to encourage now is that you ask more questions, and the panelists are still here to answer those questions. Helen will facilitate this leg of the program. From my end, thank you very much for your indulgence and for the gift of your time. Happy engagements.
Thank you, Pamela. That's been absolutely super and very, very well handled and managed. So thank you so much in terms of your role. Greatly appreciated. And as you say, we will now just move on to the opportunity to speak with all of the panel members. We've got a bit of time. So we'll just take a few questions, which I've been going through as Marcus has been speaking. I've been looking at the chat, and there's an awful lot of comments and questions and some very helpful sort of links being made. But there's just a few questions I'd like to start with from the chat to our panel members right now. So if you've not yet got your video on and your unmuted button off, then please can I ask panel members to do that now so that we can see you all again. That's brilliant. I can see Robin, I can see Tim, I can see Marcus, Graham, Maria. I can't see Clive. Are you there, Clive? Oh, yeah, great. Haven't missed anybody. I think that's everybody. So hopefully everybody can see, and just a bit of a reminder of who we've been fortunate to hear from this afternoon. So just to pick up a couple of questions, I'll get rid of the slide so we can see each other a bit more closely. So my first question, this isn't in any particular order, but just things that I've picked up off the chat so far. And please keep sending questions through, and we'll do our very best to pick up as many as we possibly can. So my first question that's come through is probably a question to Maria and to Clive. There's a question around, have you seen a change in perceptions in the UK since the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter demonstrations? In your view and your experience, have you seen any sort of change in the UK off the back of that? That's a yes from Maria. Yeah,
I think that the most, well, I have to say that whenever I was invited to speak here and to talk about Black Lives Matter, the first instinct was, what, me? Have you heard me? Can you see this face? And I went, I don't fit. And then I realized that actually, that's completely the wrong message to be sending out. It is people with my face and with this accent and with my face who need to be talking about Black Lives Matter, because we need to acknowledge that Black lives belong to Black people who are people. And that's, I think, the message that's getting across, is that the differentiation that has been created has to disappear. There's the equity that needs to be put in place, as opposed to saying, well, how many times have we heard all lives matter? Yes, all lives matter, but whenever a child needs a pair of shoes, you don't give them an adult pair of shoes. If they need the pair of shoes that fits them. If there's a young Black person who's grown up in a community who has had a disadvantage because of the community that they grew up in, and because of the circumstances and the lack of opportunities that were presented to them, that's what we need to rectify. So therefore, we do need to give that more attention. And I think people are starting to realize that we do need to rectify that balance.
Thanks, Maria. That's super. Clive, did you want? Oh, Clive, you're on mute. Clive, you're on mute. Clive, you're on mute.
I can't mute.
Hey.
Oh, that's great, Clive. I can hear you. Yeah. Start from the beginning.
I'm glad I was on mute because I was swearing.
Oh, well, we are recording this, you know.
I know. No, I can tell you one more thing. The Youth Futures and Tutor Foundation went on a two-day course on unconscious bias that was absolutely amazing, and I would really recommend it to anybody.
Okay, thanks, Clive. That's brilliant. You can go back on mute and swear again now. Okay, my next question, and I think this is probably best directed to Tim. We've had a question around we seem to be on the back foot with things like cybercrime and fraud. Should we or can we be making better use of things like artificial intelligence to try and block, track and prosecute? So is there anything, Tim, you can say in terms of us being on the back foot with things like cybercrime and fraud?
I think that's a very genuine point. It's interesting. I was at a conference in the first couple of days this week, and that was a very big part of the topic. The conference was centered around South Asia, so clearly across the globe they have similar problems. But one of the big things and encouraging things coming out of that was that artificial intelligence, machine learning, is being developed rapidly to help prevent and even better to investigate issues such as digital cybercrime and what have you. It's difficult to quantify it or to say who's going to be able to get access to it and who's going to best use it. And of course, when we're looking at law enforcement organisations in particular, they have got restricted budgets, and whether we like it or not, these types of facility, these types of utility, that they actually cost money to A, to install, B to run, and C, to make sure that they're kept up to date. Because don't forget, criminals are the ones that are always exploring new ways to perpetrate their crimes. They're always going to be ones that make things, try to make things happen to further their own wealth. But it is a very encouraging picture emerging that artificial intelligence is being used more and more and more. So I think there are improvements there, and we certainly mustn't lose heart in the fight against it. And as I said earlier on, you know, we need to be vigilant at it, and we can all do our part for that.
Thanks, Tim. That's brilliant. Much appreciated. Okay, I've got another question here, and maybe this is probably best directed at Robin and Marcus. And this is around how do we find and then celebrate the young stars?
We do it all day long, don't we, Marcus?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I always laugh when people talk about young people being hard to reach or at risk or challenge. They're over-labeled. All these labels get thrown at them. They're only hard to reach if you're offering something they're not interested in. Nike don't find them hard to reach. Sony don't find them hard to reach. We shouldn't find them hard to reach. We need to change what we're doing if they're not coming to our projects, and we don't have that problem. we change how we engage them. Yeah.
Let me just share something with you that happened sort of today. I was contacted by one of my teams in Doncaster. They've been working at a alternative learning provision with this young man. He exited from school for bringing onto school a blooded article, and he's been with us, and he has turned up every single day, on time, first in, last to leave. And he was given an option of doing a social enterprise project. So he's good with his hands, he likes wood. So he built, very simply, some really attractive sort of bird boxes. And he's put them onto our internal trust staff briefing, and lots of people have bought those bird boxes. Our CEO went across today to meet this young man who's been every morning. He came dressed up. He had a haircut last night. He borrowed some of his dad's aftershave, and he was so excited that the CEO was coming to see him. You know, that is, you know, just one young man in many that myself, Robin, and others are always shining a light on. Not how to find, it's about how you engage. Once you engage, you develop their aspirations, you develop their sort of confidence, and the future is always going to be bright with the right connection, the right support.
Excellent. We always say that young people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And as a professional, if you can demonstrate that you care, demonstrate that you care,
Absolutely.
demonstrate that there comes a point, some people take 3 sessions, some people take 3 years, but there comes a point where they go, I trust these people, they're all right.
Okay, that's brilliant. I'll move on. Just a couple of extra questions. I think we're okay for time, but yeah, maybe time for 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'll wrap up formally in terms of closing remarks. But the next question I've got really is a sort of all panel question, if you like. I think you could all say something about this, but this is around transparency, which we've heard a lot about across the course of the summit, and can we come together in terms of greater transparency, and what can we do sort of collectively in terms of that cause for transparency? So any ideas?
Just,
oh, go on. Who said that?
yeah, yeah. So it's me. It's just something that really came home to me. Actually, when Marcus was speaking about younger people, and with Robin, I did a lot of work in my earlier life as a legal officer in the RAF, and actually going out to schools to educate them about how the legal system impacted on them. And if you want transparency, to a certain extent, you've got to educate the decision makers that transparency is a value. And what I learned was holding those sessions with the students reduced the number of times I got to see them professionally. So there was a clear and obvious benefit to that open and very forthright approach for the community as well as just for the students.
Thanks, Graham. That's great. Anybody else like to add to what Graham's just said?
I think harking back to something that Gina brought up about the importance of collaborative work, but also the sort of the depth and the scale of the challenges that we're facing globally. We must be transparent. There's no dialogue to be had. How are we going to progress? How are our grandchildren going to have anywhere to live? How are they going to have any sustainable employment? We have to be clearly transparent. We have to be brave, and we have to challenge things and do things in different ways. The ways that we've been trying haven't had the impact. I was in a call last week similar to this with people from the Violence Reduction Unit in London, and somebody who wasn't just said, you've been around for 3 years, violence is rocketing. What are you doing? Like, my point was, if it was a peace increase unit, it might have more of an impact. If we only focus on the stuff we don't want to see, if we only focus on the horrible things, imagine if you applied that to your own life. Only talking about, thinking about, and doing all the stuff you don't want. That's not how we're going to change the place. So I think, yeah, we have to be transparent and we have to collaborate across different sectors.
I could say something. I think the other side of the coin is that people like to feel heard, and that is so important.
Yeah.
A final point from me, Helen, if I may.
Sorry, go on, Marcus.
Yeah, final point from me, if I may. It's just that some words that were shared to me by a great friend, Maurice Ifran Cole, who shared a TEDx platform with me in Doncaster last year. And he was talking about a more compassionate world. And if we do anything, let's make time to sort of listen, hear, and share those experiences and how we can do things better. And he was all about making time for people in a compassionate world. So I sort of endorse those sentiments from Maurice. And if you do get a chance, his TEDx talk is on the platform, so have a listen.
Thanks, Marcus. That's brilliant. And I think wraps up an answer to that question beautifully. So we'll stop there. And I'm just going to move us on now in terms of final remarks. I wonder, before I do that, whether people might be happy to put back on their videos just so that we can remind ourselves and see each other's faces again. Perhaps keep yourselves on mute, but as we sort of draw to a close, it would be lovely to see faces again if people are happy to do that. So let's see you all. Oh, that's wonderful. Nice to know people are still here. Yeah, I really hope that you found it a good session today. I want to say a huge thank you to all of you that have attended today. It's been great that we've had so many of you that not just logged on, but stayed on till the end. So that's super. A huge thank you, of course, to everybody that has contributed towards the summit, both in the run-up and this evening, in terms of those that have been able to speak and have helped to make the event the success that it's been. I would like to say that we'll follow up in terms of an email shortly, and that will contain not only the slides and details of people that have been speaking today, but it will also contain a copy of the video so that you're able to watch it again if you want to, or share it with colleagues, friends, or other people that you think might find it of help. And another couple of things I just wanted to mention were obviously feel free to share things in terms of social media. Feel free to be in touch directly either with me or with other speakers that have been involved in today. And please do, let's see what we can do to take some of this forward between us in terms of collaborating. And certainly for Agencia and everybody that we've brought together today, our work is all about trying as hard as we possibly can to transform lives in one way or another. And that might be with young people, it might be in a health arena, it might be in a justice and crime arena. Whatever it is, we're doing our utmost to bring the right people together to be able to transform the lives of people that need it. So whether that's services, whether it's communities, whether it's individual teams, everything that we're doing is trying to get that transformation to happen in a positive way. So on that note, we'll say bye for now. I hope this isn't the end of the conversation. I think we've got a lot of like-minded people and a real appetite for change. I very much hope that we can move forward on that basis. So thank you ever so much and have a good evening.
Oh, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
See you
Bye,
later.
everybody.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Bye.
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 Well done, Helen. Well done, everybody.
Oh, well done, everyone. Round of
Fantastic.
applause.
Well done. See you all soon. Bye for now.
I just recognised where Elif is sitting.